Hi, it's Pastor Andy, and one more day. I know this is been a little bit of a challenge, perhaps, in some of the depths of these videos, but today I'm going to kind of culminate that. So on Monday, I showed you how I prepare and look through the text myself, just very briefly, looking for keywords, for themes that can be extracted and discussed further. Yesterday, I showed you how I pull in some language information by using BibleHub.com, and I have other resources, but that's one, and it's certainly Logos, which allows me to go into commentaries and stuff. But today I want to put the lesson together. And I treat lessons different than I treat sermons. I could treat them the same, but I can go much, much deeper with a lesson in my planning. And some of that is just from my education background. My doctorate is in Christian education. My master's was in Christian education. And so as I do these things, I look for learning types. I learn for different modalities. I try to consider different things. And as I've said for years, I'm a better teacher than I'm a preacher. But I really go into depth in trying to determine how a lesson can be planned. On the one hand, I treat a sermon differently. So I'm going to go through both of these very, very quickly from the lesson perspective at this point. Now, what you see here is a game plan. Let me make sure this is going to highlight for us. Yes, a game plan up in the upper left. And when I create a lesson, I'm a huge baseball fan. Okay, I'm a baseball geek. My wife calls me a baseball nerd. And so I have constructed my lesson planning around the idea of baseball. And when I teach people to construct lesson plans, I tell them to construct something based upon what they like to do. I've had students do about a game of chess. He can play backwards. He doesn't have to look at the board. I mean, that's how good he is. I've had students do it by cooking, so whatever works for you. But for me, it's baseball, so this is what I do. So I have a game plan. I have the equipment that is needed, okay? And you can see that this isn't anything great. This is like if binders. I'm actually pulling something that I used as a template for my dissertation. Do I need handouts? Are there pens and pencils that are necessary? That's from the player's perspective. That's what the players need to bring to the game. What does the coach need to bring? I'm the teacher. I'm the coach. So I need to make sure there's a couple of whiteboards. I need to make sure I have markers. I need to have my laptop so that I can teach the snacks, whatever handouts there are. That's not a baseball term, but I could call that the score sheet. I might put that score sheet in there. Okay, so then in the pregame warm-up, what do people need to do before the lesson starts? This could be homework, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but this is anything they need to do before the lesson starts. In this case, read something, review the handout. Okay, so read the letter means, this is on Ephesians. So read the letter of Ephesians before coming to to this particular class. The next one, based upon how my dissertation was, the next one would have been, I think, Galatians. So it wasn't Bible order, it was an order of development. And so read letter 2. So I would have populated that information in there. Again, that's what the player needed to do for the pregame warm-up. This is what the coach needs to do for pregame warm-up. I'm scrolling down. And then the involvement. Auditory learning, visual learning, kinesthetic learning. So I tried to incorporate at least 2, if not all 3 of those into the lesson. For instance, one of the lessons I had people doing Jenga. That would be kinesthetic. That would be psychomotor, dealing with your hands. And you're also thinking, but it was just an activity to set up the lesson, okay? Then I have the starting lineup. Starting lineup is going to be when you have when you're new. So if it's a new class, you're a new person, you're a new group, and people don't know one another, they weren't needed in this case because everyone knows one another. How am I going to lead off? What am I going to do for starters? Again, in the example I just mentioned a moment ago, Jenga was used. That would have been the leadoff batter, right? The first pitch, welcome and prayer. That's pretty typical for me. And notice I have time frames on these. I'm not going to lock myself into those too stringently, but at least I want to have an idea, especially later. If it's much later in the lesson and I'm not where I think I should be, I either need to determine, okay, I need to make this lesson longer and just do it more next week, or I need to jump Is there a place that I could just jump forward? But after the first pitch, we get into the lesson. This is what we're going to do. We're going to read whatever. The middle innings, the seventh inning stretch. At this point, by the seventh inning stretch, you know, in a baseball game, you're getting close to the end. And so I need to make sure that I'm getting to a point where I can wrap up. I think this lesson ended at 7:15. So at 7:05, if I'm not getting to where I think I should be for the memory verse in this case, I'm not going to make it. So do I stretch it? Hey, we're going to continue this lesson next week. That's an option. If there's enough information to go. Sometimes discussion just allows that, and it's wonderful. Sometimes you may just have to jump forward. Then the bottom of the ninth, I'm summarizing what the lesson is. The closer comes in. Okay, the closer is going to be my lesson point, my application. The final pitch, typically going to be prayer, and then to the clubhouse. Okay, so after the game, you know, we had the pregame warm-up where these are things that need to be done beforehand. To the clubhouse is going to be the assignment for next week. You know, it's going to be a reminder of assignments. It's going to be new handouts, whatever else it is. And then some notes for me related to what the next session is going to be. So I could say, hey, don't forget that we're going to be looking at Galatians, and then we're going to be looking at, I think the sixth one was Colossians, and then Romans, and then a couple of different passages, again, referring to my dissertation. So, and then what do I need to make sure? Do I have the handouts that I need? Do I have PowerPoint slides? Are there any extra notes that I would have as the coach, as the teacher, you know, to make sure? So again, I don't do this with every lesson that I teach, but I do it with most of the lessons that are, at least I have this, the backbone of this for most lessons that I teach in mind. Many times I flesh this out in its entirety. So that's from a lesson perspective. Let me go ahead and close that. And now from a sermon perspective, this is a little old. I'm not doing this exactly the same way anymore, but I haven't abandoned it either. I write a paper. I write a lot. You know, I write normally 4 to 5 page sermon. These little scripts, I don't write these little videos as complete scripts, but generally there's about a page or so. You know, I do 3 of those a week. I do my Friday videos. So that's another 4 or 5 pages. I write a page or 2 blog, personal blog. I write a lot. Okay. And I'm kind of doing a book and some stuff. So I'm writing a lot. So I know how to write. I know how to write papers. So that's, for years, this is my standard format for writing a sermon. And there's nothing wrong with it. I think there are better ways to do it now, but this, in a quick crunch, this still works very, very well. So what is the title? The title is, I should not know the title before I know the text. Okay. So remember, I started Monday, I read the text. Now I put out a title. I've already been processing the title by the time I've read and reread the text, because I've read it in advance. But sometimes my title changes even in the middle of the week. You know, I send out an email on Mondays. We post something to the church's website on Monday or Tuesday that says, you know, here's my initial thoughts, what I call them, my initial thoughts to prepare us for worship for the week, and my initial thoughts about the text. Very rarely have I done my exegesis, my work with the commentaries and all that. I've just kind of taken a preliminary look, gotten my keywords. I think I know where I'm going to go, but as I start digging, sometimes all that changes, and my title changes and everything else. And so, but I should not have a title before I've read the text. If I have a title before I've read the text, I'm probably going to misuse the Bible. If I have a topic before I have the text, there's a chance I can misuse it. So I need to let the text drive that. What is the reading? Reading here is, what is the scripture reading? So, you know, like this month, Roger is reading. So as Roger reads, or you know, Mike has read this last week, then that's the scripture reading, so that I know, okay, if I'm going to make a tie-in, it's right here. And then what is the message? What is the primary passage for the message? You might recognize the theme and the thesis idea. We had those on PowerPoints for years. So what is, again, this is kind of the overall theme of the series. And then the thesis, that's that one statement, that one sentence statement to kind of wrap everything else. Everything is going to be driven back to this particular point for the sermon. We talked about a money minute and that kind of stuff. Okay, so now my introduction. I shouldn't start with my introduction. I might put some notes in there. I might put some thoughts in there. Oh, that's a story that could work for this. So I'll put a little note in there, but I need to flesh out my text first. Ideally, I'll start with my body and whatever the main point is, or if I have 2 points or 3 points, sometimes 4 points, I'm really trying to narrow that back down to one main point with some subpoints. But I need to flesh that out first. Once I have my main point, now how do I tie into that? Is there a story? Is there an example? Is there something about my life or somebody else's life that I can use as an introduction to bridge that gap into the body of the message? And then once the body is done, once the primary part of the message is done, now I get to the conclusion. And with the conclusion, I need to try to tie that not only back to the body, but can I tie that back to the introduction in some way? And sometimes I do that very well, and sometimes I don't do it as well. But if I don't use, my sermon is a little bit different than writing a paper, because writing a paper, you don't introduce anything new in your conclusion. What's in your introduction in your body. In fact, one way to think of it is your introduction, kind of starts wide and comes in, and then you write your paper, and then your conclusion starts in and goes wide. It's kind of the inverse of your introduction. I don't do that entirely with a sermon, because I am going to introduce some new things. A part of the conclusion is the application, for instance, but it still should have some tie back to it. And then we get into our journey. The journey is a part of our conclusion. And journey letter for today is, journey. You can see I have a little note right here. I don't have this anymore, but when I first started this in my template, how does this message fit God's plan for the church? What is our strategy as it relates? And so there's our JOURNEY, or journey in a nutshell. Then if there was, at the time I was going through, here's the principle. That kind of goes back to the thesis, just restated, and that was in the bulletin. Here's a question to consider for all of us. I'm doing that a little bit differently now. I'm doing that in the introduction with kind of a proposition for the text and a question that can guide us for the rest of that time. And then I come back at the end and make sure we've answered that. So again, that's a little bit of the difference. And then our next steps. Well, our opportunity, and then our next steps of learn, live, love, and lead. You'll notice some of these are highlighted, and here's our color key down here. I think there's actually a couple more things than this right now, but I don't do the PowerPoints. I think most who attend our church regularly know that. I hardly have ever done a PowerPoint in my life. I can, but not well. My job is to create content. And I create a lot of content, besides the stuff I wrote, the podcast and everything else that I do. I create a lot of content. Susan makes it work. So what I do is I say, here's the point of my sermon. And if I want it to be in the handout, then it's in yellow highlight. You can see that down below, handout only. If it is in green, it's going to be on the handout and on the screen. If we're having PowerPoint that day, then it's going to be in both places. Sometimes I just want to put a note. Sometimes we'll use an audio file, or I just need to put a note in the text. And so I'll just put something here, and I'll highlight it in that purplish color. That way Susan knows, okay, this is for me. So that's just at the bottom. This is an old template, but this is my template, and we still use this. Again, I think there's one or two more items on here now that we just developed this color code. And if I'm going to read scripture, like you can see here, 2 Corinthians 1:3-7, if I was going to read that, what I would do is I would put that in red lettering. And this is one of the reasons why I started using a tablet a few years ago to preach, is so that I could have this document with these colors right in front of me, rather than a grayish text of my old Kindle or have to use a color printer all the time and waste the toner and the paper to do something I can just look at. So again, this is kind of the process that I use for a sermon, very similar to this now, although it's slightly different. And then at the end of my sermon, after I've completed the sermon, or maybe in the middle of it, I was like, you know what, I need to expand on this, but I don't really have a place within the sermon. Or maybe it's one of those notes. Remember I showed you those notes yesterday from the text. Maybe, maybe it would be something like this. That's not showing up on your screen, is it? Yeah, there it is. So, maybe it's something like this that I wanted to put into a nugget, some bit of research that, I really think that's important for people to know. It's a nugget, right? But it's not going to make my sermon. Maybe it was in the final cut. Maybe it was a tangent that I would love to develop further. But I just don't have the time, and I don't want to chase a rabbit that would take me too far away. So that's where the nugget comes into play. And then we have the waypoint as well. And so after I've written my sermon, what our waypoint is our prayer related to the message in some way. So what I do is after I've written the sermon, I'm like, okay, if I was going to pray this prayer, because I will, if I'm going to pray this prayer, what would I pray? But then I try to depersonalize it a little bit so that it can be broad enough for anybody. And you may have noticed that sometimes I'll say, if you're a Christian, you might pray this. If you don't know Jesus, you might pray this. So there might be two different things like that. But typically it begins with, okay, I've thought through this message. I'm ready to preach this message. I've written it out. How would I pray to make this applicable in my life right now? And then I just kind of broaden this from my perspective into a bigger perspective. So again, that's this week. I've kind of walked you through the process that I go through each week. Again, this is my sermons are typically 5 pages of just raw text that come from 15, 20 pages of notes, some 10 to 15, sometimes more, but probably 10 to 15 pages of notes often that I bear down or bore down into a little bit. And that's my weekly sermon. Same thing for lessons. I teach Sunday nights as well. That doesn't take me quite as long, depending upon what I'm teaching. And right now, Wednesday nights, I'm simply doing a Q&A. But one of the things that you don't know, if you've been on those Q&As, a lot of times I have this file up before me. This is my commentary file. Not always, but sometimes I will have this file up on my computer just in case somebody asks a question. I'm like, let me go back and look at this. Again, we're asking those questions 3 days after I preached a sermon, after I spent most of a week researching and preparing that sermon. So it's very fresh in my mind. But if you were to go back and ask me something about Romans 1:9 right now, it would not be as fresh in my mind. But I could scroll back up to verse 9, and I could find it in this particular document and I'd look at the Bible, because I always have the Bible with me when I'm doing that Q&A, and maybe that'll jog my memory. But if there was something in particular, I could scroll up in this file and see that information at that time. So anyway, that's my process. I know, again, several who generally watch this particular channel each week might not have cared so much about this. Some of you might have found this extremely intriguing. If you have, let me know. Share, like, or put a comment or something. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of my process, my background, and how I go through this. Maybe it helps you. Again, I know you're not going to have Logos software, but there's some good tools, and those will be in yesterday's video. But if you want to get into Logos, it's a very good tool. I think I have the silver package, and it's 4 figures. I think you can spend as much as like $20,000. I'm not spending that much money, but they have a free version that has very, very limited resources. But the beauty of Logos, and I closed it down on my computer. But one of the beauties is if I'm looking at Romans 2, again, this coming week, we'll be looking at 17 through 29. If I'm looking at Romans 2:20 in one commentary and I click on it, it'll change the Bible reference. It'll change all of the other commentary references. So I don't have to go through and change each one. They're all indexed together, which makes it so nice to simply go from commentary to commentary to commentary and read the same verse without having to jump back and forth or having 16 books open on my desk and flip pages back and forth accordingly. Or 7 books as I have open in Logos. So anyway, that's enough. I need to land the plane. But if you have questions, put those in the comments or send an email to the church. Again, if you like this, let me know with a like or send a comment. And I'd be certainly happy to show you more details if you want that on a one-on-one basis at some point. So hope this has been helpful. Next week, we will return with the normal videos, kind of going a little bit more in depth with the text itself. Next week being Romans 2, verses 17 through 29. So I'll look forward to sharing those on a more normal setting. But until then, have a great week.